Game over. Game over. Lights out. You've just been completely obliterated publicly. With
Cool.
your wait, you've been caught. You've been folded like a chair, caught with your pants down.
Here, I'm an evidentialist. Presented evidence against my position means I change my position, but it's got to be evidence that like carries the scales, if that makes sense. So,
Can you
um,
explain how God gets you to objective morals? Because I don't get it. I just don't.
yeah. So, how much have you read on this topic, if I may? And
Dude,
this is not a point of.
just give the argument, John.
Okay, so it's really simple. The very nature of God is ontologically good and holds the great making properties. This
Yeah,
is
what does
why
that
we
mean?
call it. This is why we
What
call
does
him
that
God.
mean?
Or,
Who gave him those
can you
values?
can
How
you
did you hide
what
those
do you?
values?
Yeah, I don't know what good
Okay,
means in this case, right? You're just saying it's the nature of God. What does that mean?
okay. Think of everything that's evil in the world, and it's the opposite of that.
Are you saying
Yeah,
there's a
but wait a
synthetic
minute. That my
identity
opinion about evil isn't going to really make any difference about what
wait,
God's opinion is, right?
wait. So are you saying that the identity between God and the good is like a synthetic identity or an analytic identity?
I I apologize. I'm not entirely sure what you just asked me.
Oh well, you said some gibberish about the good being like the ontology of God or something. So I'm trying to like make sense of that. Like, are you saying that like the good is like synthetically identical to God, or what are you saying? What does it mean for something to be like the ontology of something?
Yes, I would say it is identical. So
Yeah,
that
but
which
is
is
it
good is
synthetically
identical to God.
identical or analytically identical?
I would say just logically identical.
Wait, so when you're saying are you just saying it's a definition?
Yeah,
Then you can just
God
run
def
the open question. Yeah, then you can just run the open question argument on that.
yeah, God definitionally is good.
Yeah, but that's not gonna follow though, because you can just run Moore's open question argument on that. Because if we get like a competent speaker of the English language, and we ask him, this thing is identical to God, but is it good? He's not gonna be able to answer that question as a closed question, given no background knowledge other than merely the semantics. So it can't be a logical identity. It has to be a synthetic identity, because we will both agree that somebody
So
who has
how
like
do you
no
define how do you define synthetic identity? Because when I think of
well
something synthetic,
analytic
it's
analytic identities are going to be the type of identities that are going to be true by definition. So it will be something like bachelors are unmarried men, whereas synthetic identities are going to be the type of identities that are true, but they're not true in virtue of definition. So it's going to be something like water is H2O. Now, if you say something is an analytic identity, then you're saying that a competent speaker of the language could answer the question without any knowledge other than the semantics of the words in the question. For example,
okay. Yeah, that
somebody
makes
if you ask a competent speaker, do triangles have three sides? They don't know. They don't even need to know like mathematics or any metaphysics or something. They can just look at they can just if they're competent speakers of the language, meaning they know meaning they know what it means for a triangle, what a triangle is, and they know what it means for something to be three-sided. They can answer that question. Now if you say God is analytically identical, then that just means that a competent speaker, regardless of their religious background, could answer the question, this thing is identical to God, but is it good? Or this thing comes from God, but is it good? With like a yes, but that's obviously not the case. And so it can't be analytic. But then it has to be synthetic. But then if you say it's synthetically identical, then the question is going to be, is this synthetic identity discovered a priori, or is it discovered a posteriori? For example, the case of H2O being identical to water is discovered a posteriori, right? By us going into the world and conducting experiments, looking at the molecular structure of water and so on. And so, but it doesn't seem like you could carry such an empirical experiment to discover that the good is identical with water. And so it seems like all we are left with then is like some kind of an a priori way of discovering this identity. And so I'm just curious, what's the a priori argument that the good is identical with God?
Gotcha. Okay, so that made it a little more clear. So yeah, my argument, I would say analytically, I would
Oh, well,
say that it
that's just going to be straight out false then, because a competent speaker wouldn't take well, a competent speaker of the language. Like if you pick up a dictionary and look at good, you're not just going to find it there being like God. Like the folk notion of good doesn't just mean God.
Right.
And so you're either going to be equivocating on the word good, you're just going to be redefining what good is. In that case, you're not talking about what we're talking about when we're talking about good. Or you're just going to run foul of the open question argument.
okay. So do this for me. Just help me out. How would you define good? Like
Well, I
in
take good to
terms,
be an. Well,
That
good is
which
what.
the ought do.
No, well, see, the problem that is the
what do
out
you say?
there is going to be redefined in terms of good. But good is taken to be what we call in philosophy a semantic primitive. It means that it's not definable in other terms, but rather it's other terms that is definable in terms of good. So there are these things we call primitives like good, existence, time, and other things that aren't like definable. You can't break them down into like further
For the
terms.
sake of conversation, can we come to understanding how to define good for the
Well, I
sake of the
just
conversation?
explained.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
just
that's
explained
what
it's like
that's what
it's a
we're working on right
semantical
now.
primitive, so
Right.
it
No, I
doesn't
understand that.
can't be
Yeah.
defined.
So what do you do in this conversation if it
So
cannot
you're
be?
saying that
No, because
I
any
would.
you're saying that it's whatever definition you offer is just going to be like relative to your like norms, right? I mean, it's
and I'm just saying that no, I mean like you can look like normative ethics, right? Like when we talk about like utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, these aren't like definitions of the good. Rather, these are the theories of what the good is and what the bad is. These are not like semantical definitions, but what was being asked for here is a semantical definition, and the good is taken to be a semantic primitive, and so it's not definable in terms of something. Though you
Well,
could provide a theory,
well,
such as
so
the
so
utilitarians and the ontologists and the virtue ethicists do, or the divine command theorists do, of trying to identifying the good with something else. But once they like appeal to an analytic identity, you can run the open question argument there. And so what's the option that's going to be left for them is to make a claim that there's a synthetic as opposed to an analytic identity. But once they make that claim, they're going to have to give us some kind of a methodology of discovering this thing.
so no, I would say we could define it. I don't think it's just semantical. I think we could define it in terms of ethics. I think we can define it in terms of morality. I think we can define it in
I
terms
don't know
of.
what the fuck you mean by in terms of morality. Like, what definition are you going to give good that a competent speaker could answer?
So
If you were to put it to him
what do you
in
what do you mean by competent speaker? You keep using
a,
that terminology.
a
I'm
competent
just
speaker
curious.
just means a competent speaker of the language. Let's just take it to be English, for example. If we ask
Yeah,
an
no,
English
I
speaker, this
okay,
thing
that's all you mean
increases
by it.
well-being. This thing increases well-being, but is it good? If there was an analytic identity between well-being and the good, they will just be able to answer that the same way they could answer, John is a bachelor, but is he unmarried? But that's clearly not the case. And the same goes
John
for like,
who?
no, if somebody was to
Just
ask,
anybody. It's irrelevant. Just
look, yeah,
he gave an example of a person being an unmarried man or a bachelor. So yeah.
Yeah, and would you
if you were
say
to ask
that's
a competent, if
would
you
you
were
say
to
those
ask,
answers were just semantical?
obviously they're semantical. If you ask somebody, this thing is a triangle, but does it have three sides? All you need to answer that question is to be a competent speaker of the language.
I mean, under your definition, literally every single definition is semantical. Like
No,
it's not just good. Like under the
definitions
definition you're
are,
using, where
well,
it's just
definitions
semantical.
are, well, definitions are a semantical notions, but not all identities are definitions. Like I gave earlier the example of the synthetic identities, like water being H2O. The
Yeah,
definition of water isn't that it's H2O.
but how would you make the distinction between synthetic and analytic if you're basically ascribing that all of these definitions are still
Oh, well,
just semantical?
analytic are gonna be true by definition, whereas synthetic is gonna be true in virtue of how the world is.
So what do you
I
mean
mean,
by definition? Because I'm just trying to
It
follow you because
means
you're
what the
obviously
word
very
mean. What
eloquent.
the word
You're
mean. What the
obviously very
word.
eloquent.
What the word means.
So what do you mean what the word means? Are you talking just semantically what the word means, or are you talking like in virtue
Yeah, I mean
of?
means is like a semant. Yeah, means and semantics. It's like the same thing. Yeah.
Okay, so your argument basically is that, and I'm not trying to straw man you. Just tell me if I'm correct. Your argument is that the definitions of what we call good and what we call evil, they're just semantic definitions. They're not, and
Well, I'm
everything
saying
around that.
I'm saying they're like semantically primitive.
I'd have to think about that. It's an interesting concept.
No, I think saying
Because
Well,
that
what does
that
that
really
mean?
well.
Well, I mean, this isn't really like an interest. I mean, this is like been around since like the 30s, since like Moore wrote the Principia. Like this isn't. It's not like a new thing, but
no, I'm not saying
that's
it's a
why a
new
lot of
thing.
like that's like if you actually like study recent metaethics, you'd see like a lot of the theories will appeal to synthetic identities.
Yeah, I definitely have to look at that because that's an interesting question. But ultimately, where does that lead us, right? In
But
terms of,
going back to the Euthyphro dilemma, though, even if you take it to be like synthetic identity, you don't really escape the Euthyphro dilemma because you can always ask something like, "Is this thing um, does God possess this quality because it's good, or is this quality good because God possesses it?" And then if you say it's good because God possesses it, that would that would just mean that um, if you think of like in a possible world in which God doesn't exist, acts of like justice or mercy or something wouldn't be good, and that's just gonna be, and you're just gonna run the problem of like a lot of people are not gonna have that intuition
I mean,
because such a world
in
is like.
virtue of the in virtue of theodicies and the problem of evil, um, I would
Well, I
say
wasn't
that stands
talking about
true, though.
the. I wasn't talking. Well, I don't. I was not
Well,
talking about the problem of evil.
you talked about justice
I
and
was talking.
mercy, and
No, I was talking about the Euthyphro dilemma. I said that if you were to say something uh, like these things like justice, if you want to say something like that, like the Craig move, where you don't want to say, well, it's not the case that it's neither the case that God commands these things because they're good, or they're good because God commands them, but rather the good is part
synonymous.
of God's no, not synonymous. That would be an analytic identity. So we want to stick with the synthetic identity, but it's like part of God. Like the good is God's nature, and what flows out of God is good. And so, given that these properties are out of God, therefore they're good. Again, this is going to be a metaphysical thesis, not like a semantical claim. The problem with that is just going to be that we can conceive of a world in which people commit acts of justice, acts of mercy, acts of courage, uh, in which God doesn't exist, and you'd be committed to saying in such a world, those acts wouldn't be good, and that would just be absurd. It's hard to see how the same person can do the same act, which is going to be called the same thing, courageous or just, and so on. But in one world, we would say that person is something good, but in the other world, we wouldn't say that the person is good, just because in one world God exists, in the other world God doesn't exist.
Repeat that
Oh, so
because I'm trying to
if you
follow along, but you're
right, so
obviously
like
more
the
philosophically inclined.
right, so like the traditional Euthyphro dilemma um, is sort of like you can conceive of it as sort of like a critique of divine command theory,
Well, I mean, well, no,
because
the way the Euthyphro was originally phrased is what we definitely call a false dichotomy. The way you just said it,
oh yeah, but
in
that's what
terms
I'm
of well, the way
that's what I'm
you
trying
just
to.
said it. No. What I'm saying is the way
No,
you
I'm
just
saying
said it isn't the
yeah, I'm
way it's
talking about the
originally
original.
phrased.
No, I'm talking about the original one, right? Well,
Yeah, you know
see
you
the
said in
original.
virtue of God possessing it,
I'm not. I'm
right?
not. I'm not
So
talking about like the very original one, the one in like the Plato's dialogue, but like the original one prior to like Christian apologetics trying to like find a way around it. It's merely in terms of like commandments. And so the dilemma was either going to be that the good is actually determined by something external to God, and so God is like useless, or it's merely arbitrary to God's subjective being. It's just whatever God decides is going to be what we're going to call good. And so the Christian response is going to be, well, that's a false dilemma, because a third option is that the good is part of God's nature, and so what flows out of God is naturally good. Uh, so it's not the case that whatever God commands is good, but rather God's nature is good. So what flows out of God is supposed to be good, and this is supposed to, and this presumably is supposed to be different from just saying that uh, what is good is what God commands. But then the problem with this is you can just create a new dilemma for it, right? You're just going to ask, um, well, is this thing particularly, is this thing does this thing flow out of God because it's good, or is it good because it flows out of God? And if you go with the first option, then again, the good is going to be independent of God, completely uninteresting. But if you go with like the second option, you can always ask, well, why is it good? Because it flows of God as opposed to flowing out of me or out of any other person. It's unclear as to why God is like privileged in his being of getting the title of something being called good or not. And a way to like motivate
Well,
his critique is
I would say
giving.
that definition comes in virtue of who he
Well,
is, right?
it's not a
So
definition because it.
in terms of in terms of being creator versus creation, that's where we could make a distinction based off what you just
Yeah, but
said. The good that flows out of
why is that relevant?
me,
Yeah,
because I would say it's a starting point. It would be like the first domino falling, right?
yeah, but
So
why is the first
in
domino? Why is being the first domino give you privilege to what flows out of you being good, as opposed to the
because
second domino?
because I would say everything that flows from that first domino is just cause and effect, and so
Yeah, but why
you
is
have the
why?
unmoved mover
Yeah,
represented.
why does the unmoved mover have some kind of a privilege over the effects of the unmoved mover? So what if he created everything? Why does that mean that what flows out of him is good, as opposed to what flows out of his creation?
Because ultimately, I would define that God as
Yeah, but now
existence
you're
itself.
talking about an
Well,
analytic identity, but then you're just gonna run afoul of like the open question argument that we ran earlier. Remember, what you need is to appeal to a synthetic identity.
so
But the problem,
you have to help me. How is my question of just saying existence itself, reality itself, in terms of how we perceive it, in terms of our conscious minds, him being the first domino or him being the unmoved mover, how is that falling into analytic identity rather than synthetic identity?
oh, because you said definitionally so. Analytic identities are going to be definitions.
No, I'm
Then
not
you just
saying
said,
I'm not saying just
oh,
definitionally. I'm
well,
saying
either you're saying it's the,
in virtue of reality, in being the first domino, being the cause
then you need to
of
show that there's an entailment from being the first cause to being the source of good. Or,
yeah, and, yeah, and I think we can do that.
yeah, but that's just yeah, but that's like the type of argument that we're just asking for. Why is it the case that the first cause, um, what flows out of that is good, as opposed to, let's say, the second effect or the third
Well, I mean,
effect?
I would make those arguments. I guess it would be analytically from our perspective, right?
Yeah, but
So
then you're just gonna run
what we
afoul
see,
of the open
so
question argument.
well, so what we see is objective, though. I think there are certain elements, like we were talking about the value of human life. We were talking about axiology earlier, and in reference to like ethics and objective or subjective morality and so on and so forth. I think in virtue of our intuitions of what is an objective standard that should be upheld based off of well-being, based off of these certain principles, I would say that these are some things we can appeal to in why we view them as good and why we view other things that are opposing these things or opposing well-being as evil. Um, it would just be in virtue, intuitionally, that is our perspective, but we're asking why is that our perspective? And so we would trail that back to the first domino. So if there's 50 dominoes in a row and we're having a conversation about moral values, moral duties, and subjective versus objective and axiology, then we're talking about the 49th domino, or we're talking about like the 39th domino knocking down the 40th domino. But I think if we take it back to a standard and we take it back to God, and if we are defining this synthetically, and I still have to study more on that, because I've never heard someone define it as synthetic versus analytic. But I think more what you're more into analytic philosophy, aren't you?
Well, yeah, but I mean, like,
Yeah.
Sure,
So
but it's different than what he means by analytic.
yeah, but there's like an equivocation and analytic there. Like, I'm just talking about the two types that you can separate identity
Yeah.
to, like analytic and synthetic. The point that I'm making is, um, if you're referring to some kind of a synthetic identity, there's got to be the type of problem that I raised earlier with like the intuition pump. Um, and also, we're going to need an answer to the question as to why merely being the first cause somehow um, means that you share a synthetic identity with the good. But if you just appeal to an analytic identity, then you can just run the open question argument.
so what's the open question argument again?
Oh, the open question argument is just going to be once you say the good is, and the is there is of like the uh, analytic identity, then a competent speaker should, once you like pose the question to him, uh, should be able to answer the question with merely the semantics, with merely a knowledge of the semantics. But that's not going to be the
So
case.
give me an example. So give me an example of what the open question argument would look like, right? So
Well,
just
for example,
give me
I'll
a
give
direct
you
example.
I'll give you an example, right? If we ask a competent speaker, John Gary is a bachelor. Is John Gary unmarried? That person doesn't need to know anything about you. He doesn't
Yeah,
need to know
it's
when,
assumed by definition.
right? He,
Yeah.
provided that he's a competent speaker of the language, he can answer that question. It's a closed question. It's a question that can be answered by merely knowing what
Okay,
the
so
terms mean.
that's what you meant by
But
like
now,
this.
but
Here's a
now,
triangle, and
yeah,
it is already assuming
right.
that
But
there's two
now let's just
sides.
say, for example, we get like a utilitarian, right, who says that the good is maximizing well-being. Um, we could ask a competent speaker and say, X maximizes well-being, but is X good? And for that competent speaker, that's not going to be a closed question. It's going to be an open question. And therefore, there can't be an analytic identity between um, X is um, X is X is maximizes well-being, and X is good.
Okay, I got you. Yeah,
It's not
I'll
like
have to
once we
study.
pick up like
I
just
don't have
another
an
way
answer
to
right
think
now.
about is no, but
So
just another way to think about this. If you think of like dictionaries as like works by lexicographers who are like empirical scientists who want to go out and like discover what people mean by certain terms. And so if you pick up a dictionary, you're not gonna once you go to good, you're not gonna find it being defined as God's nature or maximizes well-being or I don't know, being in accord with something like universally norm or whatever other theories posit like what the good is. And so what is meant by good is obviously not what like normative theories posit the good to be.
gotcha. Yeah, I'm gonna have to study more on this, because I don't have a direct answer right now, and I'm not someone that's gonna make something up on the fly. I like to know what I'm talking about if I'm gonna discuss it, and so
That's very honest. Venus,
yeah.
have you heard anybody give like a good response to this? Because I haven't heard anybody even try.
No,
There just isn't, right? Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Game over.